Terrorism and the law. We talk about law enforcement approaches to counter-terrorism and whether we're getting the balance right between liberty and security. From Melbourne, you're watching The World from Below. I'm Lizzie O'Shea. For this week's episode, we are joined by Jessie Smith and Ecehan Gulbayrak. Jessie is a lawyer with Stary, Norton, Halphen and has a particular interest in political offences. She's working on a number of serious terrorism matters before the Victorian Supreme Court and the High Court of Australia. She also has experience challenging Interpol Red Notice extradition warrants and has acted for clients facing extradition to foreign countries. Ecehan is a law student and a researcher at the National Centre of Excellence for Islamic Studies at the University of Melbourne. She's also worked at the Islamic Council of Victoria, heading the multi-faith interfaith portfolio. We start today's program with a critical look at the activities of law enforcement in response to the threat of terrorism. In April this year, 5 teenagers were arrested in counter-terrorism raids associated with a planned attack around the time of Anzac Day. In May, a 17-year-old was charged with preparing for a terrorism act after police foiled an apparent plan to explode bombs in the centre of Melbourne. Let's start with you, Jessie. What can you tell us about the changing profile of these kinds of people who are being accused of terrorism offences?
Yeah, look, I think the profile has certainly changed, especially with the escalation of the Syrian conflict. Past major terrorism cases, there have certainly been older groups of men who are centred around religious institutions, often of their own making. Now we have a markedly younger cohort. They are united by their youth, their impressionability, their lack of great religious or political insight, in my view. And this raises questions about how we deal with this offending cohort. Do we still have the very heavy-handed, deterrence-focused security policy, or should we rethink that framework to something that's more rehabilitative or diversionary based, given their youth and vulnerability?
And do we see that happening in relation to these kinds of offences much?
I don't think so. With most of the recent arrests over the last 12 months, a common feature, not in all cases but in many, is a very long period of surveillance. There hasn't been any attempt at referral to community organisations or family. And in my view, law enforcement has often watched these young men take a particular path, potentially radicalise over that time, and then to sort of head in and arrest them at that late stage. In my view, because of their youth, because of their lack of experience with the judicial process, there's a strong argument that we should be thinking of ways to divert them from the criminal justice system. I think it's in everyone's interest that we do.
Ecehan, from a community perspective, obviously these men are also very young and that draws the attention of the community and particularly the Islamic community. What do we know about the profile of these people from that perspective and why they're coming to the attention of law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Jessie was mentioning, how these kids are young, they're inexperienced and they're vulnerable. Most of the time these children are self-taught. When I say children, because of, the ones that were recently charged. So they are quite young, and even those that aren't under the age, again, they're only just turned 18 or whatnot. So they're extremely young kids, self-taught, vulnerable to internet. They're online. They're not actually talking to religious authorities and whatnot. And most of the time, what we're finding with these youth is that they're not actually, how should I put it? They're not actually part of the wider community or the wider Islamic community. They're most of the time quite cut off, isolated, in their own little bubble, and more often than not quite frustrated what's happening in terms of, international forces and whatnot.
When you say self-taught, do you mean as in their religious instruction has come from sources other than, say, a religious leader in person? It might be more on the internet. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So most of the time what we find is with these youth is that, they might read a section of the Quran, or they might come across a hadith, which is basically sayings of the Prophet, and instead of asking for further clarification or explanation, because most of the time, a lot of the things that come out from religious texts are contextual, and these are often overlooked. That's why we tend to, ask a religious authority for clarification and whatnot, but these, most of the youth actually bypass most of this and take it literally, take it as they see it, don't see it in context and, use it basically to fuel their already growing frustrations.
And then also obviously might not have a mentor or someone who might be able to
Yes.
pick up these
Yes.
kinds of issues earlier than later.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me, Jessie, what are some of the difficulties you face as a lawyer acting for people in these situations? I mean, there's talk about problems with protecting privilege when you're involved in an interview with a security and intelligence organisation. What other kinds of issues do you face as a lawyer? How easy is it to act for these people?
I think some of the difficulties arise, once again, I mean, in terms of privilege, I think we still enjoy that to a large degree. Sometimes there can be issues in you want to have family members present because they are so young, to have them understand the legal process, to ask questions when they might not be equipped to. But of course that can waive a privilege if you do have others as part of that conversation. That can be a challenge. A lot of the time though, it's being able to take instructions and give advice for such serious matters when you have such an impressionable and unsophisticated in many ways client base. It's a very alien process for them. And instead of being, able to access and draw upon a wide range of community services to help them through that process, they're very isolated. So usually if a client was out on bail, moving through the children's court, or as a young adult in the adults jurisdiction, there are so many supports you can draw upon, social workers, youth workers, to help navigate the system with them. We don't have that in terrorism matters, and it does present some difficulty, I think.
I mean, the other context that makes these kinds of cases difficult, I suppose, is the media reporting on it. Ecehan, these raids that have happened recently in Victoria have raised a lot of media fanfare. What do you think of this kind of sensationalising? Do you think it undermines community perceptions of police and maybe the legitimacy of their counter-terrorism operations?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's very true. We're finding that, with media attention that's so fixated and tends to draw upon, certain things and undermines community, the media attention undermines community efforts alongside pretty much exacerbating issues. Most of the issues that we have within the community, we tend to solve within the community. Unfortunately, issues pertaining to terrorism and whatnot really grow out of proportion, and it comes to the point where the community itself feels quite lost and unsure as to what to do. The community members that we do have who try to, tackle media issues and whatnot that grow from that, most often than not are sidelined by the community. And not only that, most of the time, because of the heavy, state involvement in these media reports and whatnot, we find that there's a growing distrust between the community and also members of the police force and the media.
You're watching The World from Below, and we're going to take a closer look at the issue of radicalisation and foreign fighters after the break.